Welcome to Winston's Cellar. Relax, listen, enjoy. The Eastern Fringe. Ever a realm barely touched by imperial influence, it was initially the least affected by the fall of the Imperium. No petty imperia ever formed from the ashes of imperial rule in the Eastern Fringe, merely becoming marginally more anarchic and barbarous. However, the devastation of Hive Fleet Kraken and later Hive Fleet Talos ravaged the Fringe horrendously. Soon after, the new Devourer surged from the west, murdering thousands of worlds. 100 civilizations were wiped out, and when the various hordes of monsters left the Fringe was utterly fragmented, countless worlds left as nothing but bare rocks. Of course, as with most genocides and disasters, history and life did not disappear. Some races and even empires managed to evade destruction, either through guile, luck, or sheer bloody-mindedness. The largest of the surviving empires was the Tau Empire. In fact, because the Tau did not rely upon the deep warp for travel, the crippling warp storms throughout the galaxy did little to hamper them. With little opposition, the Tau embarked upon multiple expansions on multiple fronts. Their optimism and hope seemed frankly surreal to the crippled, dying civilizations around them. However, this idealism and hope soon faded like everything else. Everywhere they tried to bring the greater good was dead. The Tau expanded into their inheritance. They were, however, inheriting a galaxy of ash and cold misery. Sometime around M43 during the 18th and 19th sphere expansions, Tau policy began to subtly change. The Ethereals no longer recommended offering civilizations the chance to join the greater good. It was decided at the Armed Council of 234.M43, presided over by Aunvar himself, that the other races of the galaxy were hopelessly barbarous. The other races allowed their worlds to die and warred with each other, even when unity would be the best option in the wake of such an atrocity. In short, they must be forced into submission, and their people ruled over by the only beings capable of logical, spiritual thought, the Ethereals. By 03.M44, a dozen decades into the 100th sphere expansion, the Tau Empire stretched from the dead worlds of Ishar to the barren, howling worlds of Alsanta. In total, it spanned roughly 24 sectors and comprised just over 1,000 worlds. Perhaps 55% of these worlds were dead, and during the slow, agonizing process of terraforming involving constant bombardment with bioengineered algae and various pechoid plant accelerants which nonetheless took millennia to make worlds fully habitable, the Tau had become slightly more xenophobic. For instance, client races were forbidden from electing leaders of the various sept systems and were confined to the poorest habitations upon worlds. This was the Tau Empire, and the Tau wanted everyone to understand this. The other races were inferior, as they had ruined paradise with their wars. Communication was slow but frequent in this expanded Tau Empire. Without astropaths, they relied on the billions of communication drones and messenger boats which pulse near constantly between septs, only leaving the shallow warp when delivering messages. As the Empire's borders advanced, so did its technology. Their ships became more heavily armed and protected than ever before. Limited cloning and genetic technology allowed greater medical care, with each Tau having access to multiple cloned blood samples, limbs, and even eyes. Drone technology gained greater and greater sophistication, and the first entirely drone-controlled battle computer was released in 103.M44. Pulse weaponry became more reliable and effective. and gunships and battlesuits of unprecedented quality were invented during this period. In the Segmentum Tempestus, the Tau were at the center of power. Yet, for all its unity and promise, the Tau Empire could not maintain a completely centralized empire, despite their best efforts. Space was too vast, and their vessels too slow. Some septs were barely visited by the central authorities, while others had vast armed control set upon them. However, most continued to follow the greater good, according to Aunvar and the Orthodox Council of the Ethereals. There were, however, two major exceptions. The Enclaves, Tau colonies, cut off from the Empire by warp anomalies in late M41, became all the more isolated in the 42nd millennium as the anomaly became a raging warp storm. It was not until M43 that news of the Enclaves were heard, and they had changed markedly. Without the Ethereals, the Enclaves became a realm dominated by the Firecast. The greater good as a concept had been rejected by these Tau. Only grim resolve and a strong arm allowed survival in a hostile galaxy. The caste system was virtually abolished, and intercaste mingling was not outlawed. Only the Firecast, the new military elite, remained aloof of caste interbreeding. However, though not enforced, the caste system remained in spirit, as each caste intrinsically distrusted the other. Even more strangely, the Farsight Enclaves now operated under a sort of decentralized vassal system. Territories upon enclave, worlds, were carved up between the new caste within a caste, the Shaz-Kassar. Each of these powerful warlords had acquired battlesuits, and each of these Khazar maintained their own little fiefdom with many Firecast soldiers as their vassals. Each of these fiefs sheltered other caste members, on the assumption they would provide a tax to their lords in exchange for protection. The Shaz-Kassar in turn owed allegiance to the Shaso-Shova-Kassar, the overall Grand Kassar of the Enclaves. For many centuries this rank was held by Farsight himself. However, after his death, this rank passed to his sons, and became in effect hereditary, though through the centuries the position of Grand Kassar has been disputed, and the line of succession is a tangled web far too complex to go into here. Upon the passing of a Grand Kassar, the ceremonial armor of Farsight is granted to them, and they are anointed Grand Kassar by kissing the hilt of the Dawn Blade, the symbol of Enclave liberty, a blade no longer drawn by Enclave Tau, but instead enshrined within Farsight's tomb upon the world of Fiomontara. To survive, the Enclaves abandoned the concept of refining their technology, instead relying on trade between rival empires, merchants, and the like. Thus, the Enclaves became a melting pot of differing technologies, all utilized by the Kassar in order to survive. Though not as technologically advanced as their Tau neighbors, the Enclaves have large numbers of Firecast warriors and a willingness to use Xeno's equipment should the need arise. For instance, Iran, Veibis-Trinchefen die Zanavir Fresadabel de Luxage where Enclave troopers have been seen wielding Imperial laser guns and carapace armor, deconial nanocrystalline armor, digital weapons, or other such gear in conjunction with Tau technology, in some strange hybridization of technology. So far, it has kept them relatively powerful and resistant to sporadic Tau Empire assaults. The second subversive element came into being much later. By M43, the Empire was in full expansive operations. However, it took several centuries until the process of colonization and organization of Watercast administration could be fully implemented on every sept world and system. One such neglected sept colony was the Tokan Sept, located on the northern border of Tau expansion across the fringe, one of the most distant colonies in the Empire. Though a Verdun world, it was colonized late on as the Aun were only being able to spare a single exploration fleet to inhabit it. To bolster numbers in the colonial army, many Guevesa auxiliary troops were utilized. Tokan was subdued by this combined force, though the battle was difficult due to the fanatical resolve of the native warrior Hustar, a human tribal culture that made excellent use of captured Tau equipment during the year-long invasion. Aun Kais, the commanding ethereal on the expedition, was so impressed with the Hustar's abilities that he offered them roles within the occupying Tau forces. Though the Tau Firecast were skeptical of these uncivilized warriors, the Guevesa took to them very well, instructing them on the philosophies of the greater good and training them in the use of Tau equipment, even though the Hustar had utilized much of the Tau equipment already during the war. In turn, the Hustar explained how they worshipped the Great White Serpent, and also taught the Guevesa some of their ambush techniques and unique battle tactics. As the colony became less and less visited by the Tau Central Authority, Aun Kais became more and more reliant upon his various Guevesa subjects to fend off threats. Though the expedition was well staffed by water, earth and air caste, the fire caste sent had been a smaller number to begin with. The wars against the Hustar depleted them further, and over the centuries, the fire warriors became less and less viable as a fighting force, as their numbers weren't being replaced as well as their Guevesa Hestar allies. The Gueo of the Hestar contingent, Baldan Ra, got closer to Aun Kais than any other commander. The two often consulted one another upon tactics and strategies, with Aun Kais would often get advice from Baldan on how to keep the majority of the human population of the Sept colony appeased. As a result, Aun Kais would entrust more and more duties to them. The Hustar converted to the philosophy of the greater good rather well, incorporating their serpent god into the myriad meanings of it. Upon the death of Aun Kais, a dispute broke out among the remaining subordinate ethereals. Several of them recommended themselves for the role of overall colonial leader. There was an important distinction between the two main groups that built up amongst the ethereals. The traditionalists, who argued that upon becoming Supreme Sept An, the Firecast should be put in overall command of defense once more. And the pro-Guey, who believed the Guevesa had been doing a perfectly fine job of defending the realm. In the end, through honor duels, personal and public elections, and outright intrigue, the pro-Guey got their wish, and Baldan remained overall military commander. Oddly, for the traditionalists, Baldan's supporters were not just from the Guevesa and the general human population, but also from the majority of the earth and water castes. The successor to the Anship of the Sept fell to Anjakara. As it would transpire, this ethereal was rather weak as a leader, and was virtually a puppet for Baldan and his successors. By the time more regular contact had been established by the Tau Empire with Tokan in 335.M46, it was barely recognizable as a Tau Sept world. Humans and Tau were almost treated as equals, with the Tau filling in most non-military roles, while the militant Guey caste sat on the Council of Castes and fought at the front of most assaults, while the only fire caste remaining piloted the battlesuits, tailored as they were for Tau alone. Chief Commander Moonheart of the Tau Empire forces even requested permission to invade Tokan and cleanse it of its perceived subversion of the greater good. Aunvar, however, vetoed this plan and decided to instead recognize the right of Tokan, nicknamed the human colony, as being part of the Empire, mainly because the Husta had completely converted to the greater good, with only their brutal tribal war clubs, wielded in battle by every Husta Guevesa, remaining of their old culture. The Guevesa contingent were there to stay, and would eventually become a key ally to the Tau Empire in the long war against the Thexian elite, which will be documented at a later date.